Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm looking forward to our expert panel. Before we start, I would just like to say that what I like about this expert panel is that at least two of the three can speak both from a personal experience where they've worked or where they currently work, but also from the standpoint of being a consultant. And so, Allison and Michael, I would just encourage you when giving the response to not only share your direct experience where you work, but also from a consulting standpoint. I think you have a more ecumenical view of what really is happening out there, and you hear it and see it from lots of different angles. And so please feel free to share that. Larissa, you're connected to the industry and industry colleagues, and also a major university where hiring is probably happening at all types of levels and all different departments in different ways. So I think giving a really broad brushed perspective today is going to be very helpful. The pandemic took a really major toll on the labor force throughout North America, and particularly in the industry that we all exist in, the meetings and events industry. Just curious about how Larissa and Michael in particular, how the pandemic impacted your workforce, and Allison in particular, what you're seeing and experiencing out there across various industries. What was the impact on your workforce? Who wants to go first? Let's go with Michael first.
Well, I can just speak real quickly in that as we kind of oversee our team. Conference Event Services at Bowling Green State University, we serve in a variety of ways, but obviously summer conferencing is a big part of our business, which basically disappeared in the summer of 2020. And thankfully, we never had to cancel an event. We held out as long as we could and allowed each of our clients to make those cancellations so that we could maintain those relationships. And we had to eliminate 30% of our professional staff. And so it was a big hit for us here in higher education in Northwest Ohio. Obviously, we were seeking to kind of figure out new ways to reimagine ourselves and serve the larger campus community, but it was very, very traumatic for our team and for our campus, and it was a major hit.
Thanks, Michael, for sharing. Larissa.
Yeah, I think similarly for us, we're a much smaller team. We have 2 full-time professional staff and 4 part-time wage staff. And our primary responsibility is being a venue where people come to meet. We have a lot of great technology and have always supported hybrid meetings, but if it didn't have an in-person component, it wasn't going to be facilitated through our unit. So it was devastating when all of a sudden we knew our wage employees were not going to get hours. They were not going to get shifts. There's a lot of guilt in that when you're a salary employee that was not being let go. But what we really tried to do, because we do find that it can be difficult keeping and retaining good staff and then hiring it, we really wanted to keep them engaged for as long as possible. So we worked to get really creative during the time about finding other opportunities where other units at the university might need assistance and might have gone elsewhere, in terms of letting them know that we do have staff, and we essentially just did pass-throughs on those wages that we needed to pay out. But it was pretty devastating. We literally started doing 30-minute monthly staff meetings just to keep them connected and engaged and on the payroll. And that was tough. And they all kept a really great attitude through the whole time. They were getting other employment opportunities, but I've still got all 4 hanging on. So that's a blessing.
Great. And Allison, from a broader perspective, what are some of the trends that you've seen? And if you work with anybody in the hospitality and events industry, what kind of impact have you seen and noticed?
I think that, Larissa talked about guilt, and that seems to be a big theme, especially in the higher education space, where people tend to join colleges and universities because they think they're going to be part of a community for a really long time. And then suddenly they're not part of the family anymore. And so they're devastated because they sort of made this contract that's not been honored. And then everybody else who's seeing them go feels really guilty that they're still there. So I think we just have to acknowledge there's a lot of trauma that's happened over the last year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that I've been wondering, and I probably should have looked this up, but maybe the three of you, if you were in the industry in 2008, can reflect on this. And the last time we experienced a devastating toll on our industry was the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. I'm just curious, did you have the same staffing, people being let go, people being furloughed, all of those things during that time, or was this time different?
Well, Chuck, I wasn't serving in that particular role here at the university. I've been here 26 years, but I was not in the conference event service world. But from my understanding is there was not that kind of impact that the pandemic actually caused.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, just speaking of trauma, I still remember laying off hundreds of people when I was at the University of Arizona. But it wasn't anything like what we've seen this past year. And
Mhm.
plus there wasn't it was a financially very scary, but it wasn't like, will I be alive tomorrow kind of scary. So there was just a whole different kind of, I don't know, feeling and vibe about it.
Yep. It was something more familiar. We've been through downturns before. We're going to rebound, but people's personal lives weren't at risk. And we were just wondering, when's somebody we know and love going to lose their life? Are they going to? Larissa, how about you?
Yeah, it was very different because our audience and who we served was very different. At that point, I was working on a traditional campus where 95% of those we served were university students, campus programs. Our buildings were, FTE funded. We had a lot of that piece off the tuition fees. So, and we did see people coming back to college during that time. So we didn't have that impact. And of course, 100% of our employees were student employees, not at the professional level. So very different times right now.
If I can comment as well, and I've shared this in a couple different occasions, but it was one of the first events in recent history, obviously since the early 1900s, where literally the entire planet had no mentors. Where we could say, oh, we did this before, we saw this before, this is how we handled this. I mean, literally, not only our hospitality industry, not only our campuses, not only our business sector, not only our nation, but literally the world came to a standstill. There was no one who was unaffected. And I think that's what caused the high level of trauma,
Yeah,
because uncertainty was beyond anything we've ever experienced.
that's an excellent point. Thank you. So, not all of us wish the pandemic had never happened. And it really did disrupt our industry, but sometimes disruptions can be a catalyst for change. And when I think back just to unique venues and I call it the evolution. I think we were able to evolve as a company as a result of the pandemic to start to do some things that maybe we never would have taken the time to think about doing, because there's the old don't fix it if it's not broken, right? Um, just curious, what are some of the key things to think about when reviewing, like that you considered when reviewing organizational structure and rebuilding your team from reduced levels or even from scratch as a result of the pandemic? What were some of the thought processes that you went through or still are going through from that change? Oh,
Interestingly, Chuck, just yesterday, Patrick Nelson, the director of our student union and conference event services, we actually were in a meeting together, and we've been kind of reviewing some of the very challenging situations that had happened. And then again, we said what we oftentimes say, ooh, looky here, another pandemic gift.
mhm.
The situation where it's like, this was a blessing in disguise. And we continue to use that language here on our campus because, and I shared this even with some of the larger unique venues family, but to have the perspective, the pandemic didn't just happen to us, but it actually happened for us. And just having that kind of perspective shift has been really significant for our kind of conference and service family and the other clients that I work with, to realize that during this time, we took some significant initiative to not only just bunker, but to build and
Mhm.
begin to reimagine. And quite honestly, what the largest piece of reimagination is what we're talking about today. And that is, who do we want to hire into our future? Who do we want to retain? What is our teams going to look like? What is that as we begin to move into this new normal? And so that's been actually one of the most significant decisions we've been making through this pandemic is what is the essence of our team members? What are the qualities we're looking for? How do we build out this for the future? Also, just having the perspective that there are a lot of really interesting, almost hidden gifts within this very, very traumatic crisis.
That's interesting. I actually refer to some of the things that we've decided to do and some of the reimagining we've done as our COVID gifts, right? So I think of them that way as well. Allison, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even before the pandemic, I would travel around the country and I would see people's working conditions. And I think, how can you work like this? How can you commute 2.5 hours to work, like especially in California? How is this even possible? And so, not all of the work in this industry is going to be lending itself to remote work, but whenever it is available, we should do it because it's just the right way to treat people. And I think that we all got much clearer about what our values are, what we're looking for. And I think a lot of people, there's a big question like, why aren't people coming back to work? And there's all sorts of reasons for that. But I also think part of it is like, I don't want to go back to that. I want to go back to something better. And so it's really incumbent on employers to create a workspace where people feel like they belong, that they feel inspired, they feel valued, recognized, they don't get mistreated. So I'm hopeful that it actually elevates working conditions in this country.
That's interesting, because there's a thought I'm going to share in a moment and another question I think impacts all of us. But I feel like what I really heard you say, and maybe I'm wrong, is that now is a time for employers to start to consider what is important to employees to enhance the work experience. Things like recognition for a job well done. It's not always about giving a raise. It's about saying thank you, about recognizing people, about giving people responsibilities, about shifting things around to be more aligned to relevance to skills and those types of things. So, there's some really good opportunities there. Larissa, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think, I had a great mentor at UNCW, and I'll give her a shout out. I don't think she's on today, but in Amelie Brogdon, she was an absolute workhorse. And I think we were just surrounded. We loved what we did. We loved the work that we did. And we would work it till all hours, all the time and not think about it. We weren't getting overtime pay. We just loved what we did. We did it all the time. And she really taught me about needing to take mental health breaks and, take time for yourself. And you had a really long, hard week, you should take off early today. The schedule's really light. And, it's something I've carried with me, but in all honesty, pre-pandemic, if we had a really heavy event schedule and then we got to a Friday and it was really quiet, it really wasn't supported to take truly like the mental health breaks. And it wasn't necessarily supported to work from home on that day because people didn't want it to spread and catch, and other people would, cause issues with discrepancies. But I would still look at my staff and say, hey, it's really quiet tomorrow. Why don't you just work from home? And that kind of just meant taking the day because, again, we weren't in that work from home mode. And I think we've really benefited from seeing how much we can accomplish remotely, even in these very forward-facing positions. There's a lot that we do by phone and email at our desk that can be done at home. Where now, when I look ahead at when we'll be hiring to bring in new teams, hospitality is a very long hour and grueling industry. And I think that I benefit from not necessarily having a venue that's open 24/7. So we have a little bit more normal work hours, but now having that perspective of if you have a really long work week, really hard, only one of us needs to be here on that off day. You can take your computer and work from home and we'll still be in touch. You don't have to take comp time. You don't have to take personal time. We can still do that and you can do it from home. And I think we'll start looking at that very differently, even with positions that really are on-site in-person positions. I think hopefully we'll have more flexibility and grace with that.
Yeah. And, when you think about on-site positions, even something as simple as saying you're going to have a predictable schedule. To just not know what you're going to be doing next Wednesday from now. It's so frustrating. You can't control your life. So just that one little change is something that could be a differentiator in your marketplace that you could offer to people.
And what you're actually speaking about for our panels and our team members and those who are listening in is not just how do we recruit and retain the best and brightest and build these teams, but how do you position the right people as managers, supervisors, directors that actually embody the extraordinary supervisor. And you know, Chuck and Joel may joke about this, but I love acrostics. And so just recently I actually envisioned an acrostic SUPERVISOR, supervisor. What are the qualities of a fantastic supervisor? And a lot of them are the things we're talking about. You know, to be truly empowering and to be truly supportive and affirming and all of those things, because we attract who we are and we for sure retain who we are. So, you know, it's one thing to get someone through the door, but then what makes them think I'm going to stay here for as long as I can because the work environment is amazing. And back to what Allison was saying as well, this notion that I think we've all learned that we only want to be sitting in meetings that matter. And so actually thinking about designing staff meetings and designing office conversations that really matter. I mean, because we've all been in meetings that could have been an email. You just think of, oh my goodness. But I think in many ways, what we've done now, at least in our world and all the people I'm interacting with, is that meetings now are about human connection and about discussions that really elevate us to the next level. Details can be covered in other ways. And so it just opens up so many opportunities to really leverage those 168 hours a week in new ways.
I want to thank you, Michael. I want to go back to something that Allison said in her last comments, and she was saying, you know, I can't remember exactly how you framed it, but you referred to people not returning to work, people making the choice not to return to work. And, you know, I live here on the Delaware coast and it's high season. Everybody's getting ready. There'll be millions of visitors here. And basically the minimum wage now has gone up to $20 informally because the businesses here cannot find people to work. They're offering at grocery stores $1,000 signing bonuses and $20 an hour wages. Wait staff, $20 an hour plus tips. So I'm just curious, you know, a lot of our venues rely on people for hourly wage jobs to provide support services and hospitality, waiting tables, catering, dishwashing, custodial services, front desk employees, housekeeping, all of those things. Are you experiencing a shortage of qualified applicants for positions? And is there any advice that you can offer to people to attract the best employees that you possibly can and to incentivize them to stay with you? Jump.
Why don't we hear from Michael or Larissa, and then I can weigh in just on some more global concepts, perhaps.
Well, I know even here at the university, even from a student employee perspective, I mean, it's interesting, both professional staff and student employees. I think my best word of advice would be to be patient, because there's a little bit of a stagger here. And we've been studying this through the economic lens. And obviously there's been stimulus money that's been flowing. And in many ways, for some people, they just hold on to that and say, I'm going to continue to just wait because it's been so traumatic. So even some of that initiative and that mental health and that emotional well-being about going out and getting back in the workforce and trying and applying and resume build, we need to be patient. We're just now coming out of this, as well as the training that's required. So I think we're seeing some delays because even as we're bringing people back, there's the training. Even in Northwest Ohio, it's been extraordinary. Some of our major chain restaurants, you'll drive by and there's signs, we're closed for the week. We have nobody working. Mm-hmm. I've never seen anything like that before. But as I've kind of dug deeper and kind of looked at that, I think part of it is just that there's a little bit of a delay. And because of some of the stimulus money and various things that are happening, it's a mixture of a couple things. But I think even here at the university, you know, I'll post positions and there's just not the response. Mm-hmm. And kind of digging, trying to figure out. And a lot of it is like, some people, even if they are feeling like they don't have the resources, they're like, I need a break. Or now, because things are starting to open, they're like, I'm going to take 3 months, just enjoy myself finally. And then I'll get back to start thinking about working again.
Yeah. Larissa or Allison, would you like to add to that?
I think Allison will have a really good perspective to offer. Honestly, working for we've been blessed to keep on our hourly wage employees, not by giving them a lot of shifts. Unfortunately, they've essentially been on our team, not working for a very long time, but we've done a really good job just at staying connected and engaged with them. Working at a public university, I think anyone who's familiar with that environment, you don't really have a ton of flexibility, especially with wage employees, for perks and this and that. You really learn to value and communicate those intangibles, those things of community and family. And that's really what we tried to do with retention. We didn't want to lose our staff. We were very nervous about when things come back and pick up, it might happen quickly and we might not be ready if we don't have the staff in place. So we were really intentional about staying connected with them, and even just getting them onto 30-minute virtual staff meetings just to keep them on payroll. And most of the time it was checking in with them. How are you doing? How are your families doing? Giving them updates, but they weren't very hopeful updates because we didn't have anything on the books. So I think that was, for us, the retention piece has been, none of the staff that we have this is their only job. They have other things. This was another compensation. And I think they have continued to stay with us because of the environment that we create. And that's what I've been hoping for all along. So.
Yeah. Boy, there's so many thoughts that I have on this topic. So one of the things that we recommend to all employers, not just in this industry, but how do you position yourself as an employer of choice? So how do you become known as the place where if you're good, you get to go there because it's special and it's different than all of your competitors? And so the climate and culture certainly can be part of that. The compensation that you provide can certainly be part of that. The degree to which people feel like they have input into decision making and are able to make suggestions to make the business better, that's a very empowering kind of thing as well. So just a couple thoughts. One is, good people know good people often. And so coming up with referral bonuses might be one strategy that might be useful. So if you bring in a person who stays with us for 30 or 60 days, then you get $500 or whatever that is, so that you're making everybody else be ambassadors for your organization. Packaging what you offer that's different than what your competitors might be able to offer is something. So could you partner with businesses that are nearby? And so you trade something that you have for a fitness membership, and you're able to offer that at a very affordable kind of rate. When you think about really high wages, that's fine if you can afford it for a while, but then there's going to come a time where things are going to settle. And are you going to have a conversation to say, no, really sorry, I know I paid you $20 an hour for the last 3 months, but we're going to be going down to 12 starting next month. People will be outraged by that. And so one thing to think about is, rather than actually increasing the hourly wage, could you offer like a weekly end of week bonus or something like that? So it seems like it's extra. And so that maybe goes away, but the hourly wage doesn't go away. So that's another possibility. Stay bonuses could be another strategy, or stay awards. It doesn't have to be money. Perhaps it's some, package of services or something that you give. But again, certainly compensation matters, especially to people in the $28 an hour world range, but how they're treated really matters a lot. And, Michael, that's something that you talk about all the time.
Well, and if I can just mention as well, one of the things that I know, 3 particular organizational friends of mine have actually started offering on-site executive coaching as a part of the recruitment process. Like, if you join our organization, there's actually, in fact, one is such a large organization, they actually have on-site full-time psychologists that help them deal with different culture issues, but also that are completely available at any time to be able to spend. Because I think what we've done through this, we understood more than ever through this pandemic, is that mental health is essential. Health mentally and physically is essential to being the best version of ourselves, personally and professionally. And so to offer some of those pieces, like we will provide executive coaching to you, life coaching, even counseling services. I mean, I have seen huge uptick in recruitment from some of these organizations that I'm connected to because of that, because people want to feel like not only are they well compensated, but they're going to be well cared for.
Yeah, and even things like bringing in massage day, you bring in some massage therapists, that feels very special. It's not that expensive. A lot of massage schools will send students. I mean, the quality is a little variable sometimes if they're just students, but it does sort of send a signal that you matter and we're taking care of you.
Yeah. To do those nice things. I remember one time I read a study. I actually have a workshop on motivation in the workplace. And, you know, I remember reading about a study, and I don't know if there's any recent data on this, but in this study, the employer was asked, what are the top 10, rank these 10 motivating factors in the workplace? And then the actual employees, were asked to rank the same thing. And it was interesting because the responses were totally off base. The employers made the assumption and ranked money as the number one motivating factor, that getting a raise, getting and whatnot. That was actually number 5 on the employee responses in this study that I had read. And that things that superseded the financial part were some of the things you're talking about. So recognition for a job well done. This one I always found really interesting is being part of and kept in the loop. In other words, knowing and understanding what's happening in the organization, being given a voice about what happens within the organization, being in the know and not being in a position where I have no idea, I can't help you, I didn't know that was happening here kind of responses, and so many other things. So, having time with your supervisor, actual intentional time, feeling that you get coached, all of those things were more important than money. So, I think to me, those are some of the things that are worthwhile to kind of consider and take a look at as you bring your team back. And speaking of teams, have you all been given the green light to go ahead and well, Larissa, you talked about that you kept your team on. Now, Michael, I think you said there was a 30% or 35%.
Yes, our team was 12, so we had to eliminate 3 or 4 of them. And again, we are given the green light to begin bringing them back, but just very recently, because there was still that concern. It looks like things are getting better. It looks like but no one was ready to pull the trigger, because obviously with all the benefits, and there's a lot that's going on. So we are starting to get that green light now that we've actually built out some revenue opportunities for summer of 2021. But yes, we are getting that green light, but still with a little bit of caution. Don't overdo it.
Yeah.
Hey, Chuck, can I say something about your comment about the ranking, which I think is really interesting? I think one of the reasons there's 2 reasons I think supervisors say that money is the top issue. One is because when people quit and they say, well, why are you leaving? People don't want to say, because I hate you. They just say, I was able to get $2 an hour more down the street. So that's one. And then also when supervisors had to speak to their supervisors about why people quit, it's much easier to say, oh, they got a better deal than they can't stand me. So that's, one of the reasons I think you get those answers. Because when you talk to employees, they don't usually say, I didn't make enough money, or I didn't get paid enough. They say, I didn't get paid enough to put up with this.
Right. That's a good point. So you can't pay me enough to stay here. You hear things like that. So, so now, Allison, let's stick with you just for a minute. So in your kind of portfolio of clients that you work with, do you find that most of them are getting permission or receiving permission to bring back staff, or are they still kind of holding back at this point?
I work with a lot of different organizations. And so I work with a lot of organizations that never stopped having people on camp, on their sites. So like hospitals and like transit authorities, that kind of stuff. But those that are still working remotely, I think they're moving to return people back more slowly than I actually expected them to. I would have thought, especially with the recent news, that people would be like, okay, June 1, July 1, I'm hearing October, I'm hearing January. And I think it's because I think people are suspicious about, is this going to actually hold? That's one thing. And then the other is that people do not want to come back to their workspaces. And so they've got to spend some time trying to figure out how to finagle, or not finagle, but like how to make it attractive. And I think that's probably going to be the big challenge, because when work can be done either at home or in a workspace, why would you come to work? So what can you do to make it a place where people say, oh, I get to go to work today. I really want to be with my colleagues. And so that means it's got to be inspiring. It's got to be hugely productive. It's got to be easy. It's going to be tough to get people. I love my 4-second commute. I would never want to give that up.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, Allison, if you do want to give it up, it's because you're gonna go spend time with people who are extraordinary, where there's actually face-to-face opportunities that are just so energizing.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting for those of us who are employing and who are seeking to attract, because now I think everyone's realized I don't have to do things that I despise. And life is too short. Life is too predictable. There's no guarantees of tomorrow. And so I'm going to be really cautious before I pull the trigger and work for someone or a company organization where I'm just not sure they really deeply care about me.
Well, Michael, I think that's such a good point. And I think that especially, people who had their pay reduced over this time and actually managed to sort of have a decent life, even though they made less money, they're saying, well, I don't have to work so hard to have a good life. I don't think I want to put up with this anymore.
Yeah, I think people's values have changed through this in a lot of ways. And I want to go back again. I think it's Allison who said this, that you thought by now people would have been coming back more quickly. I think the challenge that there's the many people who are on this webinar are facing is that a lot of venues that Unique Venues works with directly, conferences and events is secondary to some other core mission. And so what's happening is these venues, their core mission is being brought back to full speed before the ancillary mission folks are being brought back to full level. And I think that's a challenge. And so to me, it's how do you convince, as somebody who's in an auxiliary mission driven aspect of your venue, how do you convince the supervisor level that a lot of what you do is not for today, but is for 6 months from now? And that the longer your team is delayed in coming back, the more difficult it will be for you to catch up in revenue to where you were pre-pandemic. I mean, every day is a delay, maybe of a week of booking something, right? Does that make sense? I mean, that's the way it is. People who contact, we send out hundreds of leads a day again now. Well, most of them are not for now. Most of them are for 3 months from now, 5 months from now, a year from now, summer of 2022, that type of thing. So I think do any of you have advice on how to communicate your value to the core mission folks and to convince that leadership team that each day you're not fully staffed is revenue lost for the future? Does that make sense? Is it anything you want to say to that?
I think, go ahead, Michael, you go first, please.
Well, I just wanted to say just very, very briefly that what I've been saying, even now, I've been saying for a long time, is that you need to make sure that your department and each of your team members are adding value every step of the way, not just doing what is expected, but surpassing those expectations. So I know for us, one of the best things we did from day one is we started saying as a team, how do we add value to some of those core missions? How do we continue to reach out and say, we're here to serve as duties assigned, we're flexible, we'll pivot, we'll reimagine with you. And actually, because again, it's about the building versus the bunkering and everyone's looking for help. And so we started grabbing huge responsibilities, even running COVID sites and overseeing some of those. The vaccination process, we've been involved in a lot of that, is to continue to say, how do we, because I think oftentimes, particularly in higher education, I was noticing 74% are working at college, universities through the poll. I believe that was the number that's here today, is that we tend that this is what I do and this is what I don't do. But that puts us in a pickle from the beginning. I think my advice is always, we don't think that way, that we're here to serve, and we communicate that, and then we demonstrate that through our actions and flexibility.
So, when you think about, since you raised colleges and universities, I mean, a lot of their lost revenue has been in the auxiliary space, right? And if that doesn't come back, things are not going to be looking very good. So it's got to be strong. And you want to be ready when everybody else is ready. And so if you wait until there's demand to start bringing your people back, you're going to miss the boat, because somebody else is going to be able to, fill the spot that, you'll be able to deliver when you can't. And so I know it takes a little bit of a risk to say we're going to invest now with the hope of the future turning around a little bit, but I think it's smart. And I think, to Michael's point, we're going to hire back event people, but we're going to deploy them in different ways so they stay part of our community. They get to know us better, and then they're ready to jump the minute we've got business.
And I'm sure
Yeah,
you're feeling this too, Larissa. I was going to ask Larissa, because we're probably feeling, I'm guessing as well as a lot of our friends and colleagues on this call, that we're ready to do that, but then our leadership, they're nervous. That some of our highest levels of leadership in the college and universities are just really afraid. And so we're kind of like, let's be bold and let's be courageous. And I know you're experiencing at Virginia Tech, but there's this fear that happens across at least, the Midwest.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of that in relation to how we're gonna host meetings, host events. I like working. There's a couple folks in our emergency management here, and I've always managed to find them at my other universities that you work with, where you find ways to yes. When you ask a question, let's not say no so quickly. Let's find a way to yes. And that's been a big part of our ability to stay relevant. Our facility may not have been bustling with meetings, but we had a lot of colleagues trying to figure out how to run facilities that were still having tenants. Our colleagues coming in and using office space, but how do they do it? And if we lock this stairwell, or if we do this, how do we do that? And we're great at that. We're great logistical planners. We figure out what are those speed bumps that our guests are having as they're getting to their events, they're getting to our locations, coming to our meetings. We were able to step in and really stay relevant in capacities that we weren't really serving before. So finding our ways into meetings and those discussions to help them troubleshoot and problem solve how to make an environment that was really awkward and uncomfortable and make it feel okay and safe and still welcoming. Our building, they were very concerned about frontline staff. They didn't want, the receptionist felt very comfortable sitting at the front desk with the plexiglass shield. But I think so many of the people around her didn't feel comfortable themselves sitting there, so they didn't want to ask her of that. We set up a virtual platform at our desk. So even she's going to start back full-time in person next week, but we have had a webcam and monitor set up at our reception desk, and she connects to it via Zoom, whether she's at home 2 days out of the week or in the office, but in a back office 3 days of the week. And she talks with people, as the floating head. And at first I'm like, okay, let's see how this is going to work. Are people going to be warming up to this? And she's a wonderful person. She's a great presence. And it was a great way to find a way to, yes, we can still stay open. We can still stay operable and still do it in a safe manner. So I think a big part of it has been just finding our ways. And I mean, I'm not at my location today because we are off-site helping with our university's commencement programs because, they needed help. They knew that we had staff that didn't have shifts. So they reached out and was like, yep, great, wonderful. We're just going to do a pass-through on those staffing costs. And it keeps our staff connected and engaged. And it's allowing the rest of the people to put on these programs that they didn't know how to do. They're administrative faculty, they didn't know necessarily how to put on these types of programs. And we were able to put ourselves up there and say, hey, here's how we can make this really hospitable and welcoming.
That leads me to another thought / question, and that has to do with, people are coming back to work slowly but surely, or maybe some ferociously, big numbers right back at you. Are you putting together a retraining program for your employees, and what does a retraining program look like? How you're training your team for reentrance into the workforce different from how you used to train employees to enter the workforce? And the same with onboarding new employees, because some of your employees who may have been furloughed or let go aren't coming back. They've chosen another position somewhere else. So you're going to be replacing them. So how has retraining and onboarding changed for you?
I'll jump in on two quick notes, just thinking about the retraining piece. One, we always have prided ourselves on customer service and being a welcoming environment. I think that we all have come to learn even more. I'd like to say hospitality can be a very empathetic industry, but I think that we've learned even more how important empathy is. So what we thought or what we knew was hospitable before, we're having to rethink. When we go back to normal capacity and normal seating, we shouldn't just assume everyone wants to go back to that. Not everybody is going to want to go back shoulder to shoulder in meeting rooms. So really talking with our clients, not just about what their thoughts are, but saying, hey, reach out to your meeting attendees. Ask them what their comfort level is. Do they want to be in this arrangement? Would they prefer to be spread out a little bit more? So it's learning hospitality in a new world a little bit. The second piece that is very different, we were always a very high-tech venue. We were on Zoom for a couple of years before we ever even got into this. But since we've been shuttered, there's been so many upgrades in the technology. Before, a lot of it was about just getting people connected and just showing them how to do the very basics. Well, now everybody uses every single feature in Zoom, and they're getting into all these different technical things that our staff, even though we do have an AV coordinator that provides that, our main event assistants do everything from, greeting, cleaning, tidying up room sets, and AV support. So they actually, as they're coming in for these different shifts that they're working, we're telling them, you need to dig deep and get into Zoom and connect in a room that's not being used and see. And we're seeing, oh, there's a new security permission that is adding an extra step in how we connect here. So even if they thought, yeah, I've got this, it's learning the technology all over again, because it's changed a lot since we were here.
Even without the pandemic, technology changes at unimaginable paces sometimes. So other thoughts on how you're reimagining training and onboarding of staff post-pandemic? Is it safe to say post-pandemic, post on the downside of the pandemic? Because we're not certainly through it yet, but we're on our way out for sure.
Well, and again, I've been saying this for a while, but it has been reinforced all the more. It's given me more of a voice in this area that we want to build extraordinary teams, and that it's we is greater than me, and that it's not just about doing my job and getting my work done, but it's about being a part of a professional community that cares for one another and excels at the highest levels. Now, what the pandemic has allowed me to do is actually, with the organizations I work with, and even here at the university in my role, is to say, I think we've all learned that healthy, emotionally intelligent individuals who can resolve conflict with one another, all of those things have now come to the forefront of our training. Whereas before, like, oh, by the way, there's also this, we want to get along, we want to this, we want to make sure we have work-life balance. Well, now they're all front and center. And I have, at least even here at Bowling Green State University and then other places where I consult, it's everyone's feeling it, like we need this. In fact, it was interesting. I was just with an organization yesterday. I was there for the day doing some consulting, and they're actually using phrases to describe some of their employees as, and I'll just make up synonyms, but like, oh yeah, I don't know what to do with, COVID Mitchell, because Mitchell was great, but now we have COVID Mitchell. It's like, meaning, or COVID Martha, I'm making up names, but just like there's just people have changing, and we're seeing kind of like the lack of work-life balance, the lack of becoming outside of the thought. So we're bringing all of those things into some of the training and development, professional development, and saying, no, this is a part of who we are becoming and not just how we're behaving and what we're doing. So,
I think thinking about the return as less of a return and more as a restart might be a way to reframe just a little bit. And I mean, I've been impressed with organizations that have been surveying their employees about what do you want in the future? Do you want to come back to work? Do you want to come back part-time? What is it that you want? Because that's important. And then using those voices in order to craft decisions. But I think once people start to return to on-site work, to have conversations about how are we going to work together? What do you want it to be like to work here? What do you want it to be like to work together? What work group agreements will we make to each other so that we're taking care of each other and making sure that we feel good about being together? And it's really a nice, actually, it's awkward to do that just sort of out of the blue, but now we have a very justifiable reason to have this conversation and to level set and to sort of start with some different ground rules about how to work together. And that means it can be a more civilized workplace. It could be more participative in terms of decision making. I think there's all sorts of possibilities.
And along with that, if I may, I think that it's a great opportunity to kind of reframe. I love the idea, Allison, the kind of restart is that we pause and actually just spend some time as a team and as an industry reflecting that what are things pre-pandemic that we want to leave there.
Mm-hmm.
That there's things that like we had kind of going. It was like, the rhythms and the routines and the way that we've learned we don't miss it.
Mhm.
And so we're not coming back to normal. We're creating and imagining the new normal. That there's things that actually we can just leave there forever because we've been forced to learn it wasn't that important or that wasn't that effective or that efficient. So I think that's a fun conversation. We've actually done some things where we actually write all those things on little cards and put them in the middle of the table and say, now everything's on the table.
Oh, nice.
And then it's become like a kind of a team building. And so what are the things that we're going to pick back up off the table and put back into our world for the new normal and what are the things we're just going to leave there? And then actually go through an exercise where we just tear it up and be like, no, that's, this is kind of a fun way to kind of, because we don't take time to pause and reflect enough.
Right. I think you've been doing that for yourself. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned? So I will share that one of the lessons I've learned from the pandemic is that I used to obsess about details and perfection way too much. And I've learned that good enough is good enough. And nothing bad has happened since I adopted this new mantra. And I'm getting a lot more done and nobody cares. And so that's something I want to think about as I go forward.
It goes along with a saying that I've heard many times is that it's progress, not perfection.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, all right, we're getting near the end. We haven't had any questions, Joel, I don't believe, correct? Okay, so we like to wrap up our expert panels by asking you to imagine there's a crystal ball or you have a crystal ball. When you look into that crystal ball, we want you to answer this question, but don't give me the answer, I don't have a crystal ball. So imagine you had a crystal ball, right? So imagine you have one, and the question is this: when do you think the labor market will return to normal? Will it return to normal? And if not, what are some of the things that may change in the market for the long term?
Aren't there rules about multi-part questions, Chuck?
I don't think so. I think it makes me sound more like, an interviewer from like Barbara Walters or
Hey, I just have to.
They are. Huh?
I just have to. I think I asked you a multi-part question when you were doing your interview to become the vice president. And I think you asked me that same thing when I asked you a multi-part question, whatever that was 20 years ago. So I should have known better. I apologize.
Yes, I'm just, listen, it makes me sound more like I belong on a major news network and not on Zoom. Can we all agree on that?
Yeah.
Agreed.
But now we're supposed to answer.
Who's going to tackle it? Who's going to tackle it, though? That's the question.
Well, I think Allison actually spoke to this, and I think she was wise in saying so. I think that in from who she's connected to in her research, but I think I would say the beginning of 2022. I think we're still I think when things are back to more like the labor force, I think we're looking into the winter because I do think people are, is it going to stick? What's happening? I need some more time to kind of take a deep breath. This has been exhausting and we're on empty and we just need some time. So I think as we move, but the challenge is the beginning of 22 is also, the depending on where you are in the country, the dead of winter. And so then you deal with all of those things. I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah. What do you think, Larissa?
Well, I benefit from having a smaller, intimate venue. And I think for us, what we're already seeing trending in terms of response of people wanting to come back and reconnect, I think that our facility and our venue are going to start to feel a lot more normal a lot sooner than I thought. I was thinking early to even springish, March, April of 2022, that we would start feeling more normal. I think we're going to start feeling a little bit more normal this fall, but I think our perception of normal is going to be changed drastically. I think, hybrid meetings, I think, are just going to be part of us. And again, for us having a more intimate venue, people are probably going to be wanting to have some more smaller meetings of some sizes. So I think that's where our space benefits. And I have been fortunate. I do think we have a lot of HTM, a lot of hospitality and tourism management, recent graduates that are looking to get into a field, get into a position that they're going to find fulfilling. I think our venue in particular is a great opportunity for that. So I'm really idealistic in saying we're going to feel a little bit more normal come mid-fall, mid to late fall. That's my projection.
So one of the things I've learned about myself is I'm a terrible predictor. And when the pandemic first started, I was talking to someone who was in the COVID research space. And I said, when will it be back to normal? When can we be free? And she said, not before June of 2021. And I said, you're out of your mind. But she was absolutely right. So I just know I'm not a good predictor, but it feels like, I think maybe I'm leaning more toward where Michael is right now. Maybe just because I don't know, just what I've seen. Before spring of 2022 just seems, that's where it seems like maybe it will feel a little bit more normal. And one of the things we have not talked about, but until kids are back in school, nothing good's going to happen here. Yeah.
I tend to agree. There's Chuck coming back. I think you're all exactly right. I think we've got to finish getting through this year. I think there's still a lot of change that's going to occur in the coming months. I think that there's still a lot of people that are concerned about another wave in the fall or as we get into winter, and what happens if we actually have to lock down a few places again or take a couple steps backward. And all of that is going to weigh on us as operators and planners and marketers. But it's also going to weigh on the people that are applying for those jobs and saying, do I really want to get in somewhere, even if it's not the right job? And then in 3 months, they tell me now you're going on furlough or I'm laying you off again because there's been a bump. And so I really feel like it's going to take the experience of the fall to inform everyone to know what will 2022 really be like. And then people can, with confidence, go back out there and kind of follow the pathways they really want to follow and make those commitments. At the same time, I think we're all going to feel a lot better about making those commitments to people, because I know I've heard from clients that are saying, I want to bring people back, but I don't want to in 3 months go through this and start with the guilt all over again, with having to have this impact on people's life. So I think we're on the upside, but we've got a little ways to go out there.
So first of all, I have to apologize. I had mentioned earlier that we built a new house, and people show up just whenever they want to fix something. And so the doorbell kept ringing. You might have heard it. I'm like, I got to go answer that. So anyway, I'm going to throw a curveball at the panelists, because while I was listening to your responses, I have a different closing question. Based upon our experiences of the past year, and I wouldn't say the uncertainty, I think there's certainty about the future, but I wonder, when you're sitting down with a new employee during an interview, what's one question that you would ask that potential staff member now that you wouldn't have necessarily asked before the pandemic? So in this hiring process, what's something you want to know about a potential staff member that you might not have wanted to know prior?
Chuck, do you mind if I go first? Because I have to jump off exactly at the top of the hour.
Mhm.
The question I would ask is, what do you do when you don't know what to do?
Hmm.
Because I want to know who's resourceful, who's flexible, who can try to figure things out and navigate ambiguity.
Nice. Thank you.
And and I'm already asking these questions. I mean, I have a whole series of questions that are pandemic related. And so I want to know what was the hardest, most challenging part of the pandemic for them personally. And then I'm going to follow up with, and how did you respond and cope through that? And I'm looking for tenacity. I'm looking for perseverance. I'm looking for persistence, at a certain level of just emotional well-being. Because I want to know, and I've used the phrase already, but I want to know, through the pandemic, did you bunker or did you build? Not just in your life. What is something you learned about yourself through the pandemic? What is something that's going to be, and I've actually, what I just said, I will literally say that. I will say, so what is something pre-pandemic that you've decided to leave there and you're not bringing into your new future? And I love to, because those conversations, and honestly, there's been folks who haven't been very reflective about those questions, and I will not hire them, because that is such an important thing, an important kind of concept that we now have to understand about people, because there's always going to be challenges, and struggles, and difficulties. And obviously we've experienced at the highest levels, but I just need to know how they think about difficulty and challenge and, hardship and those things. So.
Go ahead, Chuck. Did you want to say something?
I don't know what the contractor's waving at me in the window, and I don't know what he's saying to me, but I just went like this. So
well, I will actually go off a little bit with a twist of what Allison had said. I think it's been really funny, and I think maybe something that probably everyone has joked about themselves with, but I wonder how much reflection they've done with it, is how you hold yourself and how you accomplish your responsibilities and your goals and your needs when no one is looking. We've all been operating at home very remotely, very unsupervised. How have you held yourself, and how have you committed to whatever it is that you've been doing, whether you've been laid off and your new dedication has been your family or your own mental health, your own whatever, or have you been working remotely for an organization? And how did you hold yourself to a standard that you could turn around and tell someone and really feel proud of? So I think that's been an interesting piece. I don't know about everybody else, but I certainly went through those feelings and saying, okay, if somebody asked me what I did today, would I feel good about it? And wanting to end the day in that mindset.
Brilliant, Larissa. You just added another interview question to my.
There you go. You're welcome.
Well, I think we don't have any questions, do we, Joel, in closing?
No questions.
Okay, so with that, I just want to say thank you to the panelists. I know Joel has some closing slides, as we typically do. I do apologize for my slight interruption, but I think this is a really good discussion and a necessary one. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I wish I knew some of the statistics and how things are evolving in Canada, but I see statistically here in the States that something like 18 states have gone a week without a death or something like that from COVID. And the number of cases is down to levels that we haven't seen since the start of the pandemic. And so I do believe there's some real reasons to feel positive and energized and let those shoulders fall a little bit. So thank you.
Excellent. And thank you, Chuck, for moderating as always. We had a chance to end this thing right on time today, and we keep the streak alive and running just a couple minutes over. And I love that about you, because again, I know we could do this all afternoon. And for those of you that stayed with us the whole time, we really appreciate your attention and being a part of the community today, because these are really difficult topics that we're tackling, but really important as we all emerge from the pandemic and try to figure out what's the best way, as some people have talked about, for the new normal or better normal, or what do we want to do to have learned some lessons from the pandemic and to make things better on the other side. So just a quick reminder to everyone that we continue to have educational opportunities for all of you. out there, depending on your interests and the things going on. There's some listed here. There's a planner roundtable on the 25th. Roundtable specifically for Canadians so that we can hear more. As Chuck just mentioned, we want to understand better what's really happening in Canada and what the timelines are looking like for our neighbors up there to the north on the 28th. Those of you should have received an invitation if you're a venue operator to be a part of that. A couple Facebook Lives in the future, member group therapy. We're going to talk about creative marketing strategies on June 17th. And then our last two Roadmap to Recoveries, we've been kind of gearing up and planning for the journey and getting our team together. We have to pack on June 22nd. So we're going to talk about some of those last minute things to worry about when you're getting ready to fire up your operations. And then we're going to actually hit the road and adjust our course as we're learning what's going on. We'll be talking with people that have been engaged in meetings for at least a couple months. What's going on? What are they learning? And how are they dealing with continuing to move forward in a time of emerging from a pandemic and still dealing with restrictions and masks and different things like that. So most of those are at 2 p.m. Most of those can be found for registration on our resources page out there. And with that, again, I just want to thank Dr. Brown, Larissa, Dr. Valancourt, who had to drop off right at the top of the hour, for being a part of our panel today. Your insight and expertise is critical. I thought it was a great dialogue. It looked like the audience felt that way as well. For those of you on the call, this recording will be available within 24 hours on our resources page, and I will follow up with all of you and send you the results of the poll directly so that you have them for use in your world. And with that, I bid you all a good afternoon and rest of your week, and we will see you all on a future Unique Venues webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.